Hello and welcome back to Truss Issues, the podcast where we track the first 100 days of Liz Truss's premiership. 100-day marker, which is looking less and less realistic as the podcast plays out. But let's keep going. Let's see how much longer she has. Joining this week, we have Ben Blissett, TLDR UK's lead writer, and Zach Michaelis, TLDR's editor-in-chief. I wasn't here last week. How are you both doing?
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
very well.
Did you have a nice time on the podcast without me?
Yeah, I think it went okay. I think
Rory did a great job, I've heard.
Yes, it's a shame.
I've heard
he's
you
not on
two
today.
drop the ball a little bit, but Rory, some incredible.
Did you hear
knowledge
this
there.
from Rory?
I did hear it from Rory. You're right. So I didn't miss much, right? Like not much happened last week when I was away. Pretty quiet. Everything's all good for Truss still, correct?
Yeah, she's absolutely smashing it
Yeah.
as Prime Minister.
Huge.
It looks like she's going to be
The
going
honeymoon
into the
period is looking
2030s.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
So a key policy piece so far was the mini budget. Well, hers and Kwarteng, obviously. But since I was last here, Kwarteng has lost his job. We've got a new Chancellor, and the entire mini budget has been revoked pretty much. I mean, there's some caveats there, which we'll get onto. But even since we last recorded, we've got a new Chancellor. Things are changing really fast. So Jeremy Hunt is our new Chancellor, replacing Kwasi Kwarteng. What are your thoughts on that appointment? Is it a good move from Truss to have Hunt? Is that going to stabilise things and make the markets happy? Or is Hunt just jumping into a poison chalice at this point?
Yeah, I think it was a smart move in order to try and unify the party a bit more. I think that she became very aware last week that her brand of politics was very much the right of the party, and they didn't sort of, by and large, the MPs aren't part of that wing of the Conservative Party. It's a very small faction. So she's just trying to bring the party back together. It hasn't worked. It was a sort of an attempt to try and steady the ship a little bit. And him revoking everything this morning presumably was also part of that plan. But, you know, the chaos still exists.
Yeah.
A lot of backbench Tory MPs don't think that she's up to the job. There's a massive poll coming out at 5 this afternoon, which is supposedly going to be massive. So I'd suspect that they've fallen even further behind Labour.
Yeah.
There's projections that Labour would absolutely annihilate the Conservatives still in an election. I know obviously, a couple of weeks ago we had that 30-point lead, and there's some speculation about whether that would hold or whether that would be a one-off. Doesn't look like that's a one-off at all anymore. It looks like that is Labour are just substantially ahead. Yeah. So I think it was an attempt to try and steady the ship slightly by bringing in someone who represented the centre of the party a little bit more. Or at least not the right-wing faction. And it didn't go well. I mean, it might have done a little bit, but not enough.
Okay. So Zach, what do you think about it? Do you think
No.
any better news for Truss? You got any positives here?
No, I mean, sort of just going to echo what Ben said. I understand the rationale. I think it was both, she did want to unify the party. I think it was perhaps more market-facing than you're making out to be. I think a large element of the rationale behind Hunt's appointment was just that it's a good guy to calm the markets.
Yeah.
But politically, it hasn't worked for her because she's now effectively ceded all her political power to Jeremy Hunt. I mean, he does look like the Prime Minister now. It does look like a general staging a coup. And Truss, and obviously I don't think Truss has a long shelf life anymore. But I think the problem here is that she had no good options. So it doesn't look like a good option. It won't save her. But then again, was there really an available sequence of actions that would have saved her? Probably not.
Okay, so Jeremy Hunt's been appointed. Neither of you think that was necessarily not necessarily
It was the best option available.
It was the best option available, but not exactly going to save her. And in fact, later on in the podcast, we're speaking to a former Conservative MP who thinks not only is it not going to work, but also it could further contribute to her downfall. But before we get to the kind of pressure Truss is under, it's probably worth discussing Hunt's first days in his new job. A job he might also not have for that long, because if Truss falls, who knows where he'll end up. But regardless, the first major thing he's done is basically reverse everything that was in the mini budget. This is the mini budget that set fire to the country, the pound, and the government all in one fell swoop. During the announcement, Hunt said that he was basically reversing almost all of the tax measures introduced in the mini budget. Do you want to quickly run down what that means in practical terms?
Yeah, so I mean, I can do it quite simply. He's got rid of everything, realistically 3 things, which is the national insurance cut, the stamp duty cut, and bankers' bonuses.
Okay, so 2 of 3 of those are probably fairly popular with the public. The national insurance cut benefits a lot of people. Stamp duty cut, broadly people want to be able to buy houses. Bankers' bonuses, obviously one of the more toxic original policies. So interesting that one's stayed.
Well, the other ones that have gone. So one of the most interesting ones was when we were talking on Friday about this, when Rory and I were talking about this, we were saying that it was unlikely that they would make any changes, at least on Friday, to the energy price cap, because that was, one of the biggest things that she said about in the leadership election, one of her big attack lines on Labour, which is that they would only do it for 6 months. So the idea that Hunt has now reversed that, I think, is quite significant.
Just to clarify what is changing there.
So originally, Truss had said that it was for 2 years they would maintain the price cap at £2,500. She's now said that it will only be the case until April this coming year, and then they will have some form of review. So it's possible that they might just target that the support to lower income earners more. So maybe only lower income earners will have that cap applied. Perhaps not. Maybe they'll just continue at it. But the point is that is no longer guaranteed beyond 6 months.
Yes.
But that was that was one of the big things that this whole weekend and Hunt being appointed demonstrates, is that a lot of the promises that Truss had made to become Prime Minister just aren't tenable. They don't work. She can't do that. Market forces have just meant that the kind of Prime Minister she's promised to be, she is not able to be. So a lot of what she promised just can't happen, really.
And Zach, what do you make of this list of policies here? The ones that have been scrapped, the ones that are staying, obviously keeping national insurance cut, keeping stamp duty cut, and keeping bankers' bonuses. What do you make of the ones that are on the scrap heap and the ones that are being kept?
Well, I think the main thing with the ones that are on the scrap heap are that, especially the energy price guarantee, the changes to that, they are, in fiscal terms, the most significant policies. So it does look like Hunt has a sort of myopic focus on balancing the books with little to no regard to the political consequences of that sort of thing. As Ben just mentioned, obviously, the energy price guarantee, changing that is going to be really unpopular. It might be fine now because obviously it hasn't been scrapped yet, but when it comes to April 2023, and Hunt was strongly implying that it was going to be whatever the new programme is that comes in then is going to be far reduced from what the current one is. That is going to be really unpopular. And I think it's also worth mentioning that in that speech, or the statement that he gave, he was talking about how every department is going to have to find further, he called them efficiency savings. In practice just means cuts. And then also explicitly said that some departments will also face cuts. Not only does that directly contradict what Truss said on Wednesday, it's also just politically very, very difficult.
On that point though, so Hunt probably was most notable during the kind of Cameron era, the austerity era, not necessarily as a driving force behind those things. He had various roles in health, etc. But do you think if we're heading back to a more austerity time, more cut-driven time versus Johnson, who was very keen on spending, do you think that's something that there's any appetite for among the public, or do you think there'll be a major pushback towards more cuts?
No, there isn't any. I mean, there's just...
There never was much appetite, but...
Well, and also, but there's... A, there never was much appetite, but B, this is not like 2010. Most of the easy, quote-unquote easy, savings were done by Cameron and Osborne. And I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, but you can see there's a good graph in the FT somewhere where you look at, essentially, spending on public services, and it sort of goes down under Cameron and Osborne. Now, 2013, it flattens out. And then it jumps a little bit with Sunak and Johnson, because as you mentioned, Johnson is more sympathetic to fiscal stimulus than his predecessors. And the reason that it flattens out in 2013 isn't because Cameron and Osborne had a change of heart. It's because they just couldn't find anywhere else to cut things. And the point here is that all the cuts, all the politically palatable cuts have been done, even some of the unpalatable ones. And the remaining cuts available are all politically very, very difficult, which is why it looks like it's only going to get harder for Truss.
And also, I mean, I imagine part of the reason why Cameron and Osborne got away with it is because they marketed themselves as a sensible economic power and that they were being fiscally responsible, etc. That's how they justified it. And when those cuts would be on the back of a mistake made by the Conservative government, making that fiscally responsible case is a little harder, you would have thought. Ben, do you agree? Do you think the public have any appetite for this kind of politics?
Well, not particularly. And I think there's a couple of other things here with Cameron and Osborne Osborne as well, is that I know they were in a coalition government, but they were elected by the public at large.
Yeah.
And there was the Lib Dems sort of keeping them in check on some things. So there had to be concessions made, which almost were for, maybe not all, but at least it represented some of the sort of left wing and those that wouldn't support the Conservatives traditionally. Liz Truss hasn't been elected yet. The people that did elect her elected her on cutting taxes,
which she's now not doing.
Which is now so. The people that supported her did so almost because the thing that separated Truss from Sunak was her economic policy.
Yeah.
It was that she was going to cut tax. So now that she's not doing that, her mandate's gone from the very small mandate that she had anyway. So she's got very little authority to actually do this in the first place, which is why we're in this chaotic situation, because there's just no one that actually the MPs don't back her. The membership that voted for her don't back her because the reason that they did so was largely on economics, and the general public voted for Boris Johnson in 2019, not Truss.
Yeah.
So I don't think many people. I don't think many people support her or the policies that she's going for at the minute.
It seems then as well that even within her own party, even her own MPs aren't particularly on her side. There's speculation at the moment that over 100 letters of no confidence have already been submitted to Sir Graham Brady, which in ordinary circumstances would be enough to get rid of her. Obviously, we just had a...
almost double. Almost double,
yeah. How many is what's the required
54.
number? 54. So if we do have 100, in ordinary times, we would be having a no confidence vote. But because we've just had one with Johnson, there's a cooling off period, which means essentially as many letters can be submitted as they want and nothing immediately happens. Now, rules could be changed, special procedures could be enacted, but we're not aiming for a specific number in this instance. Regardless, as I just said, there is speculation that numbers have reached as high as 100. And earlier on this afternoon, Ben spoke to Ben Howlett, a former Conservative MP who we've spoken to on various TLDR shows before, to get his thoughts on the situation. And in this, Ben outlines why he thinks Truss might not have much longer left in office.
Okay, so it's a bit of a crazy day today. I sort of seen your tweet earlier that suggested that there could be up to 100 letters of no confidence sent in to the 22 committee, to Sir Graham Brady. There is no formal mechanism to get rid of Truss, though, at the minute. So how do you think that these letters could actually end to the downfall of her premiership?
Well, you're absolutely right. So the numbers of letters are kind of irrelevant to an extent because she does have a year's worth of grace period. But if, of course, there are enough letters received by Graham Brady, who's the chair of the 1922 committee, then the likelihood is that he will be forced to go and see her to tell her she's got two choices. The 1922 committee will change the rules and therefore she'll leave or she should resign. So from what I hear from former colleagues and the MPs over the other side of the road, then it looks like her game is up over the next couple of days.
Yeah, so what do you think the likelihood of that happening is then? Obviously, the 100 letters is speculation at this, at the minute we have had no confirmation that is the case. Do you believe that 100 letters, that has gone in? And what do you think that the sort of relative likelihood is that Brady actually acts on them?
Over the last few years, I've certainly had enough practice in terms of answering this question, which is that Graham Brady never will say exactly how many letters he's received until a threshold has been met. So we'll never actually know. But obviously, we've heard 4 MPs over the weekend come out and say publicly that they've got no confidence in the Prime Minister. I don't expect there to be as many MPs this time around coming out publicly and saying that they've got no confidence in the Prime Minister. But I do believe that there is somewhere over the 100 threshold of MPs. And that would basically mean that Graham Brady has got one choice, which is to really go over to Downing Street and have that very difficult conversation with the Prime Minister. Since we've been on this interview, the Prime Minister has been replaced by Penny Mordaunt at the House of Commons in answer to an urgent question. So she's got another number of commitments this afternoon, including the Chancellor's statement. So it'll be very interesting to see whether or not she'll actually turn up to any of those. And that might give us an indication as to whether or not she'll be Prime Minister by the end of today, let alone tomorrow or by the end of the week.
And what do you see the timetable sort of being if that is the case? How would this all sort of work actually in practice this week if Brady did meet with Truss?
Well, based on experience, and I've been in many a circumstance where I've seen prime ministers leave office over the last few years, haven't we all? But what will happen is that the prime minister will likely meet with Sir Graham Brady if there is over 100 letters later on this evening. She is expected to be with the One Nation group, what is dubbed as the WEPS group, this evening anyway, and then a reception with her cabinet. So if either of those get cancelled, we'll have a very good indication as to whether or not Graham Brady is in fact sitting down with the Prime Minister. So watch this space, but I do suspect that she will at least get through the Chancellor's statement this afternoon, and I suspect that Graham Brady will at least allow that to happen. But it's anyone's guess right now. This might not come off. I have sat in other rooms where MPs have decided not to actually pull the trigger, but in this instance I think probably it's highly likely that over the next 48 hours Liz Truss will not be Prime Minister.
And I suspect I sort of already know the answer to this, but what actually is the mood on the backbench? I know that you're probably in contact with quite a few sitting Tory MPs, and I imagine they're not particularly happy, but have you been hearing anything in particular from them?
Not particularly happy, maybe quite an underestimate, I would suspect. I think the atmosphere is somewhat febrile. It's incredibly, I suppose, just speechless in many ways. Like me, you can't imagine that after going through months worth of leadership election races that you end up having this sort of circumstance. And MPs didn't vote for her in the first place, so they are in a sense really worried about what happens in the future, but they're also somewhat just completely awestruck in this sort of sense of what on earth is she doing. So at the moment I think they're trying to be a little bit more tactical than potentially they would have been under previous prime ministerial changes, and thinking, okay, how do we create a future vision that enables us not to have to go through that mess of a leadership battle for months on end. And I think that's probably delaying quite a significant number of MPs in terms of them coming out and opposing or saying that they've lost confidence in Liz Truss.
Yeah, so what would this actually mean for the wider Conservative Party then? If what you're saying does happen this week, if there is some sort of rebellion against Truss, what does this mean for the Conservative Party? Because there would then be two Prime Ministers removed from the person who won the 2019 general election. Liz Truss, who stood on a platform of cutting tax, will have been forced into not doing so. The polls are really not good for the Conservatives right now. What would this actually mean for the Conservative Party?
Yeah, again, it's worse than that, I think. Really not good, I've seen in the past. This is oblivion for the Conservative Party. This is end of their existence as even an opposition party. I think polling today showed that they would actually be the third party in Parliament. So, it is not a nice place to be as an MP to face that sort of consequence of your actions. So what does this mean for the Conservative Party? I think this means the Conservative Party will probably end up either splitting or alternatively the Conservative Party will end up putting in a caretaker candidate. And this again is why I imagine that there's been a delay in the number of MPs coming out and saying that they've lost confidence in her, because they don't know what caretaker what caretaker leader will look like following on from the removal of Truss. They don't want to, as I understand it, do a replication of what happened with Boris's loss of office, which is to wield the knife but didn't necessarily know what would happen next, because, well, we know what happened. It was Liz Truss. So big question is whether or not members actually will get a vote in the first place or not. I suspect not, and it will be a coronation very similar to the leadership election campaigns like the one I worked on with Theresa May. So suspect there will be one unifying candidate that will be put forwards. I don't know who that would be. It might be Jeremy Hunt, who did a very, very good job today and also on Friday. It might be Penny Mordaunt. It might be Rishi Sunak. But I think all of them has learnt something from the leadership loss of Boris Johnson, which is he who wields the knife doesn't necessarily hold the crown. So, we'll have to wait and see what that looks like over the next 48 hours.
And what do you think of Jeremy Hunt's performance? I know you've just referenced it now, but what do you think of Jeremy Hunt's performance this morning? Has that bought her any time in any sense? I know that he's sort of undone a lot of the mini budget, and there is a sort of a Retfield poll coming out at 5 as well, which might sort of undo it. But taken in isolation, has Jeremy Hunt's actions this morning in any way helped her?
No. I think it's helped him quite a lot. I really don't think it's helped her one bit, because at the end of the day, the point that one Conservative MP said to me earlier on, which was, well, what's the point in Liz Truss then? She's not popular with the electorate, as we've seen from the polls. Her policies now have been completely U-turned on. So what is she doing? She's ultimately hanging on to dear life, a bit like Gordon Brown in the last days of the Labour government, when they were trying to negotiate a plan with the Liberal Democrats in 2010 for a coalition, and that failed. So, I know she's got many more years to go before she can invoke squatters' rights, but at this point in time, she looks to be probably the shortest serving Prime Minister since Stanley Baldwin.
Again, I suspect I might know your answer to this, but if you were still an MP now, obviously the choice facing a lot of MPs is either stick with Truss in the hope that polling gets better and that she improves, or obviously jump ship, and that has its own sort of list of consequences. Would you be one of those calling for her resignation?
I think you know the answer to that one. However, now I'm not an MP, I think she should carry on going and going and going. This is amazingly hilarious to watch from a commentary point of view. From a market's point of view, I've literally this morning, I can promise you, had to call the bank to increase my standing order on my mortgage payments. So, like everybody else out there, I am absolutely fuming that she's created a huge amount of market instability, whacked up our mortgages, and left us with absolutely none of the benefits that we all thought she would have. So, incandescent on a personal level. From a commentary point of view, keep it going for as long as possible. It's great content, but I mean, there's a serious side to this, which is that she has been horrendously damaging to our economy, to our stability, to our credibility internationally. So the faster she can go, the better, in my view.
And if she does go, do you think there should be a general election, and do you see that actually realistically happening?
I don't see it realistically happening, no. But, what will happen is whoever is the new Prime Minister will face that interminable question, which is, when will there be a general election? David Cameron decided to resign in 2016 after Brexit because he didn't want to end up facing exactly those questions. So I suspect exactly that question will come up time and time again. And turkeys don't vote for an early Christmas, so Conservative MPs are no way going to be voting for a general election anytime soon. Not with these poll ratings, anyway.
And just one last question to sort of end on. Have you had any interesting messages at all from any of your former Tory colleagues about Liz Truss? Has there been anything particularly interesting that you've sort of received?
Well, I mean, over the last 24, 48 hours, I've certainly received quite a few. I mean, hence I've found out how many letters are sort of coming in. But one thing I was quite amused by was the point of her having a cocktail or a drinks thing with a load of One Nation, in inverted commas, wets MPs later on this evening. And we were trying to work out exactly how you start off a conversation over a cocktail with Liz Truss after she's just completely tanked the economy. I can't imagine anybody's going to be having a polite conversation, put it that way. So,
I certainly wouldn't want to be her in that situation. Yeah.
No, it's going to be a disaster. So, I don't even know if she'll last that long, to be honest with you, Ben.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. Well, we'll have to see this week. And, if anything big does happen, we'd love to be able to speak to you again about it. But thank you for joining us today anyway.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's what Ben Howlett, former Conservative MP, had to say. Clearly some pretty negative news there for Truss. Ben, obviously you were the one that spoke to him. What do you make of those remarks? Do you agree with some of those conclusions, or do you see it differently?
Yeah, I mean, his sort of assertion that things aren't good for Truss is obviously, we're all in agreement on. I think certain elements of it, I'm sure he's spoken to a lot of sort of backbench MPs and is probably more tuned into this than we are. But I think that...
Could you be less tuned in?
Well, have you spoken to any backbench?
Well, no, just tuned in generally to what's going on.
No, I know.
But I do think that we'll find out by the time this goes out. I think that there's it's maybe more up for question whether she's going to go today than perhaps he thinks. I also, the idea, it's a long way off talking about splitting the Conservative Party, things like that. But things that, like on the general election, they're just, the only way that would come about is if either Truss calls one, which she definitely won't, or Parliament votes for it. And when you've got such a huge working majority, even when they are so divided and they don't support it, it's just that's not going to happen. So yeah, I think a lot of what he's saying very much is true. I think we'll have to see over the next few days whether Truss is pushed out as soon as he thinks. But yeah, I think he's broadly right on what he was saying.
What do you make on the broad conclusion, Zach? Do you think she's got more than 48 hours left, or do you think that's in line with realistic expectations?
I just think the question is sort of a bit redundant, isn't it? Because she's definitely gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, 48 hours or a week, who cares?
Do you think it is genuinely that, if you were like framing the bounds of reality here, do you think 48 hours to a week is where you're putting your guess?
Oh, it's so difficult to say. I mean, like, there's obviously a counterfactual in which she just sort of clings on and we have a Bojo-esque slog all the way through to her eventual demise. But I do think that actually that the relevant time interval is probably days and weeks as opposed to months.
Okay.
I can't see Conservative MPs stomaching the sort of polling we're seeing and the sort of polling we're expected to see tonight for very much longer. And I think they'll quickly realise that things are only going to get worse. I mean, obviously, a good example of this is if she's done the whole switching a Chancellor thing and things are still going crap for her, they've got to conclude that there's
what
not
else
much
can
she
you
can do. Yeah, you played your trump card, didn't work. I think that's sort of my take on that. I guess so.
So, obviously, if she does go, we'll need someone else. So kind of two questions here. One is, what do you think the procedure will look like? Obviously, we've just been through a full leadership process. It took ages. There were a ton of candidates. There were clearly some favourite candidates, some candidates that, while they have no legitimacy from, like, they weren't voted for, they at least made it through the process. There's some clearer front runners now than we had 6 months ago when Johnson was kind of falling by the wayside. So do you think we'll go through another full leadership process and we'll be stuck in that chaos until Christmas? Or do you think it's more likely they'll make some kind of unanimous appointment?
The speculation at the minute is that they'll just make an appointment because, who wants to go through another massive Conservative leadership election? The difficulty, though, with that is that, they then have, for a Prime Minister who's already going to have questions of legitimacy, when you're 2 Prime Ministers removed from a general election, to then have not been elected even by your members is only going to add to the difficulties of legitimacy. So that is certainly going to be a question. But I think that they'll ultimately conclude that it's just worth not doing the election and appointing someone and almost framing them as a caretaker Prime Minister, just someone to tide us over until it's realistic that they can have a leadership election again. I think the most likely option is that they're going to be installed.
Regardless of how they end up getting in, who do you both think is the most likely to end up replacing her? You don't have to just give one if you don't want. If you want to give 2 or 3 and rank them, that's fine. But with Truss clearly on the ropes, who do you think is most likely to replace her?
Oh, do you want to go first? Because
I think either Wallace, Mordaunt or Sunak.
In order?
Not necessarily in order.
Put them in order for me then, Dad.
I think probably Mordaunt, Wallace, then Sunak.
Ascending or descending order?
Sunak the least likely of the 3.
I would say Wallace is actually very unlikely because obviously he was a potential front runner in the leadership campaign. And for essentially personal reasons, because he didn't want his personal life to be outed, which was apparently what was threatened, and Ben Howlett implied that last time he was on. He didn't run. Then I think you have to have a little bit of money on Suella Braverman. You can just see the right wing coalescing around her, which would be interesting.
But there wasn't the support for the right wing in the leadership. That's why somebody coalesced around Sunak.
Intuitively, I agree with you. I don't think it's likely, but I still think you have to put a little bit of money on the right-leaning candidate, and I think Braverman has positioned herself as the front runner for that contingent bit of the parliamentary party. I don't know. It's just I don't want to
go on. Top three.
Oh, I'm gonna go Sunak, Bojo, Mordaunt in that order.
Okay.
Which I think is actually a crap bet because I don't think any of them are likely, but I just can't see who
is anyone likely.
How do you see Bojo coming back realistically?
I think the thing with Bojo is that
I love that we've reverted to calling him Bojo after having a policy of
Johnson. Let's call him Johnson. The only thing with Johnson is I just think that in, if you're just going to personify the Conservative Parliamentary Party as just sort of one person, they're clearly very, very anxious.
Yeah.
And when you're really, really stressed out, you often reach for, the good times.
Yeah.
And
The comfort
Boris
blanket.
Johnson, he is the comfort blanket. He is the warm bit of insulation for them. And you've got to give him credit, actually. The amazing thing about Truss is it's shown how impossible it really is to maintain that electoral coalition that Boris Johnson somehow managed to do. And I just think that when you're down on the ropes and polling's looking so miserable, a bit of old school Johnson boosterism, that's the...
Never hurts.
Yeah, that's the antidote.
We spoke about this last week, I think, and saying how weird is it going to be if there's this little thing of this long Boris Johnson tenure with this weird little sort
Especially
of
if
Liz Truss
let's say he
6-week
suddenly
period.
absolutely bombs back in. He's here until 2030 as he hoped forever. And what a fun little anomaly that would be. That would be a good pub quiz. Like,
yeah, exactly.
How many months was like the break? Because
Yeah.
that's never really happened. I mean, there's been breaks in tenures before, but not like this.
But never you leave the leadership of a party then come back. That would
He's
be
barely
truly...
got time to strip his wallpaper off the wall and he's straight back in again.
Do you get
It's
a new budget, do you
unbelievable.
think? You do get a new budget every time
Surely,
you move back
yeah.
in. Yeah. Maybe that's his long-term plan.
Good
That was
scam.
the
He now
plan.
can now build a treehouse he
Yeah,
wanted.
there you go.
Wow, what a
That would be amazing if
conspiracy.
he had to move back in.
Well, he would.
Well, no, but redo all the flat,
Yeah.
how he did it, all that. Be amazing.
Oh, wow. What an idea, right?
What an idea.
I mean, we joke about this now, but this could be the case in
Oh,
a
absolutely.
week,
I
2
know.
weeks' time.
it's Zach's second most likely pick.
It would be very Italian of us.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
really would be our Berlusconi.
He
This
would,
sort of permanent
straight
figure. Yeah.
Absolutely bounding back in.
Yeah.
I mean, irrespective, we were saying earlier that like the Hunt pick is a bit Mario Draghi. It's a
very-
technocrat entering, trying to settle the markets
He
again.
also said that he ends his speech on "We will do whatever is necessary," which is
almost the exact quote.
It's the Mario Draghi whatever it
Yeah.
takes thing, which is sort of sad actually.
So we'll end up either technocrat, sticking with our current like nightmare,
Yeah.
or returning to Berlusconi.
I
Is this
do-
a favourable comparison? I feel like this is problematic.
Right, who are we insulting here? The
I
Italians
don't.
or
I have
us?
no idea, but
Oh,
I
think
don't
we're being
like
a
it.
bit peak on the Italians, but yeah.
I do sort of wonder what would happen if Truss remains. Like, what happens if we get to Christmas and she's still here? Like, what situation would we find
Well,
ourselves
the
in at
thing
that point?
What is fascinating about this is it's amazing how shit the options are for them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
get rid of Truss,
phenomenal,
it's
isn't it?
shit. Keep Truss, it's shit. Get a new leader and don't call election, it's shit. Get a new leader, call election, it's shit.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable. Every
If you
branch
had
of the probability
all
tree is
of
fucked.
this like decision tree of shits,
Yeah.
which routes are you preferring? Do you think for them?
I'd just be so stressed. I think.
Yeah,
this-
I'd be stressed.
I
Which
genuinely
pile of
think,
shit do you want?
I think I don't know which one I want, but what I will say is, if it was me,
Yeah.
I'd just be so paralyzed by the terror of all the shit that I'd just.
You just
stick-
eat them all up.
I'd just
I think
literally
I-
just stick with whatever was going on.
I-
It would be trust until 2024 for
actually-
me,
yeah,
and then
I-
I'd lose my job.
I sort of weirdly agree that in a sense it's like
If this is a tasting menu, Bush Tucker Tyrrell style of shit, which shit you eating?
I do sort of think weirdly that keeping Truss, although it's very unlikely she's going to improve things by 24, if she does manage to get some stuff together and by Christmas she manages to even recover the poll slightly,
Yeah.
that would be better than changing leader and all of the
Yes.
Oh,
chaos that comes with it.
Back there. Just think about, if you were a Conservative MP, just think about actually Truss leading you into a general election.
I know that would be
Oh, I think.
But then, as you say, who are you replacing her with? Who have you got great
and
confidence
do you
in?
want to roll the dice and
Well, yeah.
risk getting Suella Braverman?
better the devil you know, though, isn't it? It's like how.
Is it if the devil's that rubbish?
Well, it's true. It is true. It's a very good
the
point.
devil polls on -50.
Yeah.
I
Is
reckon the
it- is
devil
that
could poll higher. I reckon if the devil tried,
He's definitely got a certain.
So if we got to the point,
he's got a demographic.
so if we got to the point where we're comparing polling ratings between the devil and Truss.
I mean, YouGov did it, not us. We didn't make the numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all we've got time for
There are
today. I think
also Satanists out there that do sort of like the devil, whereas I doubt
There's
there are
people like
many
Suella
Truss
Braverman too.
supporters. Very
Ah,
good.
that's a bit peak.
Bit harsh, bit harsh. What's the Venn
Rubbish
diagram
Italians,
there?
and now we're doing Suella Braverman.
Nah, it's fine. It's fine. They love
Yeah.
it.
Do you want to trash anyone else before we wrap up?
No. I was trying to wrap up already, and I don't know. We ended up insulting the devil, which I feel quite self-conscious about. Anyway, that's all we have time for right now. Partly because we need to edit this podcast and get it up before it ends up being inaccurate. And partly because in 48 hours, we could be back here discussing the demise of Truss and ending the podcast, because we said we'd do this as long as she was in power for the first 100 days.
I think
we
should carry
joked
on.
episode 1.
We should carry on tracking her even if she's not.
Just in her personal life.
Days.
We did say 100 days.
Yeah.
They're going to be some short podcasts. She was spotted going to Pret. What sandwich do you reckon she got?
And did that influence the markets?
Absolutely not.
Such a sad sandwich. I don't know what the saddest sandwich is, but you can imagine. It's one of the veg ones. It's like a salad.
Cress in it.
Yeah, cress.
Like an egg mayo. That's got a ton of cress, right?
Yeah, that's a sad sandwich.
That is a sad sandwich.
Yeah.
Comment below the saddest Pret sandwich, and we will be back later in the week, either on Friday for the next regularly scheduled episode, or sooner if we have to make an emergency episode. But we'll be here tracking Truss, and we'll see you whenever that ends up being.
The name isn't tracking. I know that you tried to end it on like that's the name of the pop.
It's Truss Issues.